Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, I talked to two of my ESPN colleagues about three quarterbacks of interest, Derek Carr, Marcus Mariota, and Sam Darnold. We don't know yet what direction Washington will go trying to bolster the position, but we do know each one is a person of interest. Then it all depends on the cost for each. Anyway, Paul Gutierrez, who covers the Raiders, provides insight into Carr and Mariota, as well as a cool little anecdote about Ron Rivera and new Hall of Fame coach Tom Flores. And then Rich Cimini provides insight into Darnold. After hearing him, you might hesitate to buy into any such move to get him, again, depending on the cost. You can follow Paul on Twitter at PGutierrezESPN. That's PGutierrez ESPN, and Rich at Rich Cimini, RichCimini. You can read my work on ESPN.com. Also, stay tuned for another special offer later in the podcast. And again, Washington still they have quarterbacks on the roster with Taylor Heinecke, Steven Montez, Kyle Allen is an exclusive rights free agent, and they're still dealing with Alex Smith. And as my colleague Jeremy Fowler reported, and I've been saying this, but Alex Smith wants to keep playing. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think we've all could tell that, but it's definitely he definitely wants to keep playing. I think from Washington's end, they're seeing which way they are going to go. One of the options is still having him come back, but it's certainly they're going to explore, as Rivera had told us on the podcast and others, they're going to explore all options. Anyway, before I get to my guests, I did want to share a few nuggets, or at least a couple little things with you. I failed to discuss Marty Schottenheimer's death on the previous podcast. He was only here 1 year, but I've always felt like the biggest mistake Dan Snyder made was firing him after that season. Not only did they lose him, but they also lost John Schneider, who was their player personnel guy at the time. They could have set this franchise up for a while with Schottenheimer being here for 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, and then Schneider kind of taking over as far as having more power in the front office and building things the way he wanted to. However, Dan Snyder was so early in the process, it never really had a chance. I'm not even sure if it would have a chance now, but it certainly had none back then. What Dan Snyder wanted was power and to be heavily involved, more than he is now. Schottenheimer really didn't want to consult with him as much as the owner wanted, and it hurt the relationship. In truth, some of Snyder's partners disliked Marty from the time he fired Vinny Cerrato that winter. Then, Schottenheimer ticked off some vets having an Oklahoma drill on the first day of practice, while later showing Darrell Green how to field a punt. I think Schottenheimer's training camps were the most exhausting that I covered. 2-a-days, full pads, every day. It was brutal. That team was awful in the preseason and lost the first 5 games. I remember being with Rick Snyder. God, there's a lot of Snyders. Rick Snyder with the Washington Times, and Schottenheimer in the lobby of it was Rick and Schottenheimer and myself in the lobby of the practice facility. This was after 2 games. Rick told him he was already hearing rumors about Marty's job security. Marty dismissed it completely, and I can still see it's like, no way. Didn't think there was any chance it was going to happen. Of course, Rick was on target. This was maybe one of the best coach teams I've seen in my time covering Washington. They won 8 games with Tony frickin' Banks starting at quarterback. Listen, not only that, but you looked at that. Because I had followed Schottenheimer's career as a coach from the time he was in Cleveland through Kansas City. I grew up in Cleveland, so those teams were kind of were a big deal to me. But I knew what kind of a coach he was. I also knew that his ego tripped him up, and it tripped him up in Cleveland. And it tripped him up here too. But I also knew what a well-coached team he would always have there, Kansas City, and then his one season here. And I always kept thinking, I can't believe this is a Schottenheimer coach team. But you didn't know. You'd look at that roster and say, but where are the wins going to come from? They just didn't have a whole lot. And then they cut Jeff George. But what Schottenheimer did is he built a team that had a mentality. And he wanted an identity, and he got it. After 5 games, there was a near mutiny. I remember how miserable he looked. He was then a rookie. After 16 games, there was near universal buy-in. I'd say the only 2 who really didn't buy in were Darrell Green and Bruce Smith. I think they both kind of knew they'd be in trouble if Schottenheimer returned for a second season. I also remember Green one time telling me a year or two later about how he met with Marty when Marty first got here and how Darryl was telling him all these things he had going on in his life, from the foundation to this thing and that thing. He said he later realized all Schottenheimer wanted to know is, do you still want to play ball? That's what he was looking for, guys who wanted to play ball. Now, I think at that time, Darryl still did, because he still put in the prep work, etc. Anyway, it's just kind of Schottenheimer's mentality. The other thing I always remember is they were terrible. The answer to every question was, why, what do you guys need to do? His answer was always work harder. And it's kind of a message I always give to my kids too. Something's not going right, work harder. Anyway, I also remember sitting in the press room with Liz Clark when news broke of Steve Spurrier's resignation. She immediately said, he's coming here. It wasn't fact. She just knew that Dan Snyder would pursue him. I had some doubts because I'm like, why would you fire Schottenheimer? But she knew people like Snyder better than I did. And she was right. Anyways, it's a shame how it ended, but it provided a glimpse into Snyder's ownership. And it's a shame for Marty Schottenheimer that he never got to the Super Bowl or did anything like that, because the guy was a terrific, terrific coach. On Taylor Heinecke, when the detail of his contract emerged, it's clear that this is really a one-year deal for $1.5 million. If he doesn't win the job and he remains, say, a third stringer, he won't be paid much. If he wins the backup job or even starts games, he has a chance for incentives. But it's not a deal that screams, we know he can be our guy, or even, he's our top backup. Nothing like that. And if he doesn't do the job after 1 year, they can get out of the deal. There's no harm. I mean, it's $1.5 million guaranteed. That is it. Now, it's a good deal for him if he goes and proves himself. It gives him the opportunity to win a job and then to earn more money. That's great. I think it's perfect for him. I'll have more in coming days on the complete breakdown of his deal as far as what has to happen to earn more, to earn all that money. It's like almost $8.8 million over 2 years. What has to go right for him to earn that? So don't look at it as a 4.2 or 4.4 million per year. It's not. It's $1.5 million guaranteed. Everything else has to be earned. Injuries have been a concern with him, and he told us that he was going to bulk up this offseason. That's very wise. Now, clearly he would have been trying to do that in the past. It hasn't happened, but you know that that's going to be a bigger emphasis for him. This contract gives him a lot more opportunity to buys him some security where he can then just worry about training in the offseason. That's good for him. He also said he was going to alter his playing style. So, for example, maybe he doesn't dive for that touchdown if it were a regular season game in the third week or whatever. To that I say, not sure I'm buying it. I'm sure he means it. I don't doubt that for a second. But I can't tell you how many quarterbacks I've heard say something similar. I'm going to alter my ways, only to not do it. It goes like, I remember Rex Grossman in 2011. He was benched because he'd throw interceptions. He'd talk about it taking him, after when he was benched, he's like, I got to be more smart. I got to be a little more cautious with the ball. He'd go in for a game and he'd be more cautious. And you could tell it ate him up. It lasted a game. Then he literally told us, I said, F it, let it fly. And he did. And he didn't just say F it. He used the whole word. Anyway, Colt McCoy, Robert Griffin III, they all talked about sometimes taking a different approach to their game, only to realize this is who they are. The reason Heinecke put himself in this position is because he played this way. I don't know that you can just go from being ultra aggressive to not being that way and to playing with a certain level of hunger. I don't think you want a guy like Heinecke somehow feeling like, okay, I can just protect myself, because a guy like that's always going to feel like, if I don't take this approach, am I going to lose this spot, whether it's a starter, backup, whatever it is. So I think it's great if he can do that and become smarter and protect himself more. But I still think it's going to be difficult for him to pull it off at a complete level the way they need. But again, the way this contract is structured, they're looking at him as a backup, which is why we're going to be talking about some of these other possible starters later in the podcast. And if he earns more than that, then he'll be paid more than that. I do think Washington has interest in all the quarterbacks we'll discuss later on this podcast. The one thing to know with Mariota is that his contract contains escalator clauses, so if he's traded and is a starter, his salary basically doubles. The Raiders need the salary cap room. I don't know what they'd accept in a deal, but he is on the last year of his contract, and again, because of the money going up, it can't be a lot that they're going to get back, I think, if they really want to create some space. Washington does have an extra third-round pick to play with. I wouldn't give up a lot for Mariota, but I do find him intriguing because of the mobility. And he did play well when he went in this season, and he clearly is a guy who has ability. I remember a coach in Tennessee that I knew once telling me how much he liked Mariota. And I was a little bit surprised at how much he liked him. He felt Mariota that year was ready to take off. I want to say maybe it was 17 or 18, maybe 17. Injuries, I think there was some issues with injuries, and he didn't play that well either. It wasn't just injuries. He's worth a shot, but that's the only way to look at it. Worth a shot. I kind of put, Carr is in a different category, but I think Darnold is in that same boat where you have to say worth a shot. If you trade for Darnold, though, I think because of his contract, you almost need to be convinced that he's your guy and you can build with him because you probably want to extend him because you're probably going to have to give up a little more to get him, I think. Anyway, I think especially with Mariota, if you got him and you're only giving up a little and there's no extension, clearly it doesn't mean your long-term search is over. It's just that, hey, get through you're not giving up a lot for a guy who's a starter or likely a starter, and then you can build around them. Anyway, that's it from me. After this break, I'll be back with ESPN's Paul Gutierrez to discuss two quarterbacks Washington has been monitoring, Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota.
Support for this podcast comes from Progressive. Saving money on your car insurance is easy with Progressive. It's an average savings of $796 for customers who switch and save. In fact, customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts on their auto policy with Progressive, including discounts just for starting a quote online or owning multiple vehicles. Get your quote online at Progressive.com and see how much you could be saving. National average annual car insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive in 2019. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations.
Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with ESPN's Paul Gutierrez. Well, Paul, before I get to the quarterbacks, I've got to ask, I know that Tom Flores meant a great deal to you. So to see him finally get in the Hall of Fame, what did it mean to see that? And you just go there.
Yeah, John, it was number one, thanks for having me. But number two, to answer your question, I mean, it's just kind of like, it's strange because, as journalists, you're supposed to be objective. You're supposed to stay straight down the middle. And yet there's an advocacy that is inherent in journalism as well. And when you're trying to bang the drum for a guy that you believe deserves his rightful place in the Hall of Fame, you kind of do that. And that's what the Pro Football Hall of Fame lends itself to. It becomes a campaign. And I had to look back and see when the last time I really put it in print. And I believe the earliest I saw was 2007 when I was at the Sacramento Bee, wondering out loud, wait a minute, what's wrong with Tom Flores and Jim Plunkett for that matter? Why aren't they in there? So you just keep digging, you keep writing, you keep advocating, you keep going on the radio, on sports, and whatever it may be. And when it finally comes to fruition, especially after the past 2 years of heartbreak, especially last year with that Blue Ribbon Committee, it's like you can finally exhale. And that's just my perspective. I can only imagine what Tom Flores and his family were feeling and are still feeling to this day, a couple days after it was made official. Now, I did talk to him before it became official, and I was able to put it out there. He let me put it out there that he was going in, and he had told me he had known for a week. And that was probably the hard was he couldn't say anything about it, just his immediate family. So to see it come to fruition, to see it finally happening, it's just a huge sigh of relief because I don't know if there's anybody else that I've covered since I've been doing this where it's felt like, wait a minute, this is a big snub. This is a huge omission, especially considering not just what he did on the field, but what he did so many people off the field by being pioneer and by being a minority, by being a Latino especially. My personal story with Tom Flores goes back to when I was a high school senior. After I graduated high school, we went to Hawaii for our senior trip. We back into LAX, and I'm picking up my bags, and I'm thinking, okay, senior trip is done. I saw it to the real world. What am I going to do with my life? I didn't really know what I wanted to do yet at that point. And I look at the carousel, the baggage carousel, and I see some Raider gear going by. I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. Because, at that time, I'm a huge Raider fan growing up. And I see a man come up and start grabbing me. I look up, and it's Tom Flores. And I'm just thinking, wow, at this kind of rite of passage moment for myself, to be sharing an airplane back from Hawaii to the mainland with Tom Flores, who really just resigned as the Raider coach anyway. And to all these years later, to be able to talk to him and to kind of, I'm not even going to, say that I shared in the moment, but I was able to document his journey it was really something special on a personal level. So long-winded answer to your short question, but I hope I kind of encapsulated it for you.
Absolutely. The other thing is too, because there's a connection here, Ron Rivera. What do you think that? And I haven't talked to Ron too much about Tom, but I am curious from you follow this and know about it. What do you think that a guy like Tom meant to Ron Rivera?
And I've asked Ron about this before. When the Panthers were in the Super Bowl out here in the Bay Area back in 2016, I asked him then at the Super Bowl media night, which was all a circus anyways, right?
Right.
But I asked him about Tom Flores, and he mentioned that he was a role model for him because as a player, he's playing at Cal in the Bay Area. Raiders are winning Super Bowl 15 when they were still in Oakland, and then they go to LA and they win again. And Ron Rivera's on that famed Super Bowl team in the mid 80s for the Bears, and they played the Raiders in 84. So he told me at that time that he would look up to him because, these are more my words than his, but you look across, you see somebody that kind of looks like you, that gives you a certain reason to aspire to loftier goals. And that is essentially what Ron has told me in the past, that if he looked over and saw somebody that kind of looked like him and had a similar upbringing and could relate to him, then it let him know that these things could be done. So it would be interesting to get Ron's take now that it's officially a done deal, and he is going to get his bust. He is going to get his jacket, but to be able to look at him and see that, hey, these are things that can be done, and it just gives you one more point of pride and inspiration going forward.
Okay, let's shift to quarterbacks. Derek Carr, he's a hot name in this offseason so far because there's always those domino effects. What is his situation there, and do you anticipate anything happening with him?
It's interesting. Out in Las Vegas, it's in the Bay Area. Before that, it was always the off season was Derek Carr speculation season, and because his name was always going to come up in trade rumors, and because to me, I've covered this team pretty regularly since 2005, whether it was for the Sacramento Bee, CSN Bay Area, ESPN, and I've never seen, and I will go to my grave with this, I've never seen a more polarizing figure in Raider history than Derek Carr, simply because people either love him or they loathe him, and there is nothing in between when it comes to him. You do a blind taste test, so to speak. You look at his stats, you're like, wow, 4,000 passing yards, 25 or so touchdowns, less than 10 interceptions, quarterback rating in the hundreds. What's not to like? And then there's just something missing, and that something missing is getting to the playoffs. Now, granted, in 2016, a broken leg in the next to last game of the season derailed that, so he wasn't able to play, but he led there. But he's got a losing record. He's never had he's only had the one winning record, and yet we had this assignment this week, as I'm sure bold offseason prediction.
Right.
My bold offseason prediction for the second year in a row is Derek Carr will remain a Raider, because there's going to be story after story after story that Derek Carr is moving on and he's going to get 2 first-round picks. And I'm of the mind, well, if that's the case, then you're bearing the lead. The Raiders should have moved on from him a long time ago if they can get 2 first-round picks for him to help fix that defense. But, his name's always going to be out there, talking to people in the building, talking to sources close to him. He fully expects to continue his career and finish his career as a Raider. He holds virtually every Raider passing record anyway. It's just there's something missing, and when you try to put your finger on it, it's getting to the playoffs, taking that next step. And this would be his 4th straight year in Gruden's system, and last year was his best year in Gruden's system. I would say that 2016 was his best overall year, but last year was right up there with it as well.
And then, obviously with John Gruden, he has a reputation for changing his mind on quarterbacks. How firm do you think he is on Derek Carr?
I always put it this way, John, that if Mr. Right, he's Mr. Right now. And really, okay. I don't know how much, love affair can continue. I don't know how he likes to flirt. He's always going to flirt. John's always going to flirt with other guys and look out there and see what's out there. And he should. He's kind of a quarterback whisperer. At least that's how he kind of sees himself, and others see him in the industry is that way. So he's going to look out there and see. It's not so much are they going to fall out of love or anything like that. Does he think something better to improve the team? At this stage, you got a guy that's already been in your system for 3 years and can make every throw. I do know that he wishes that he would extend plays more. We saw a little flash of that with Marcus Mariota when he replaced him in the game against the Chargers this year. So that's the only thing that I wonder is will he get distracted by a shiny thing? And I'm not here to advocate one way or the other, but if it comes down to finances and Mark the skill set really more closely resembles what John wants to do on offense anyway, well then that's something they have to think about. To kind of frame it as a love affair or when is he going to fall out of love? I think we're beyond that because the guy's been with them for 3 years and he's
Right.
steadily progressed every season since.
And last thing on him, how tight were he and how good was relationship with Derek Carr and Jack Del Rio?
Thick as thieves. They were very tight. The only time I ever saw any sort of crack in that relationship was in 2017. Derek Carr took a beating at the Denver Broncos, ended up breaking a couple bones in his back, and he only missed one game. But in the immediate aftermath of that game in Denver, Jack said at the podium, "Yeah, he's just got a sore back. He'll be fine." Umbrage with that. He's like, "Oh, really? Well, that's nice to know." So, and it's one of the few times you actually saw Derek Carr show a little annoyance with Jack at that time. So I do know that when Jack was fired at the end of that 2017 season, when Mark Davis was able to secure a commitment from John Gruden, I hung out down in the locker room area trying to see exactly what was going on, trying to paint a better picture for the fans. And the last two players that were with Jack off in a side room were Derek Carr and Khalil Mack. So very tight. I'm sure they keep in contact to this day. And I think I know where you're going with this, right?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, yes, of course. I wasn't trying to hide that either. But I also don't think, I mean, unless the Raiders go out and get Deshaun Watson, it's hard to see them moving on from Carr. And I don't see this team giving up 2 first-round picks. But there is another guy that could be available in Marcus Mariota. There are some cap issues there. Do you think that he is a more likely target for teams because of that?
Yeah, and with Marcus, his cap is significantly lower than Derek's as well, just over $10 million, I believe. And basically he's taken a whole season and a half off. So he's fresh. He looked fearless when he played in that game. He wasn't afraid to tuck the ball and run. A lot of read options that we hadn't seen in a long, long time with the Raiders, if at all. So he might be a more prime candidate to be traded. Interestingly enough, the Raiders did give $1 million guaranteed to bring back Nate Peterman to be a backup quarterback. So if you want to start looking at tea leaves and seeing exactly the way things are going, that might be a good place to start too.
What did you think of Mariota? I mean, I know it was a weird year to get a feel for guys, but what did you think? What did you hear about him? And is he somebody who could? I've talked to some people, Paul, who feel like he'd have to be a guy who comes in and competes for a starting job rather than is given one. What did you hear about him behind the scenes or anything like that? About him?
Yeah, this past year for him was basically a maintenance year. He showed up to the Raiders in that truncated training camp, dealing with ankle and elbow and shoulder and injuries all over the place and a couple surgeries too. So he was able to kind of just get himself right, both physically and mentally, which the mental part might actually have been the most important thing. And when he got his opportunity to replace Derek, who strained a groin against the Chargers on a short week, I believe it was a Thursday night game, he came in and didn't really look like he had missed a beat. And it was actually really impressive the way he handled that offense. Derek Carr takes 99.9% of the snaps in practice all week long, which I'm sure every starter in the NFL does anyway. But for him to get out there, he had them on the brink of winning that game through a bad interception late, but still led them downfield on the opening possession of overtime, had them at the 5-yard line, 1st and goal, couldn't punch it in, settled for a field goal, and then the defense let them down again, and they drove down. So what I thought was interesting was Derek Carr was nowhere near 100% the next game against Miami, and yet John let Derek talk him into playing. And Derek, after the game, said that he would never want to be seen as being selfish, that his team and didn't put them in the position to succeed anyway. He'd feel bad. Well, that's exactly what happened in that game because the Raiders were already out of it. There was nothing to do other than just see what Marcus Mariota can do. So that, to me, is one of the unanswered questions is how good could Marcus Mariota have looked, or how would he have played if he had had a full week of practice knowing that he was going to be the guy? Instead, those 3 quarters that he played against the Chargers, we got to see of him. It was impressive. It's a nice in case there's teams looking for him, but he does have a pretty decent sized contract, especially for a backup quarterback.
Right, and that's the last thing. Do you think they have to trade him then because of that?
It depends upon, again, teams can always figure out the salary cap, right? If they want somebody, they'll make room
Right.
for them. The Raiders over the cap. We don't know what that number is going to be at this moment. They've got a lot of decisions to make, and it's not just at quarterback. It's at right tackle with Trent Brown. It's at receiver with Nelson Aguilar. It's this defense again under Gus Bradley. So there's a lot of other things that have to happen first before, I believe, they figure out exactly, okay, well, where do we allocate this money? Do they give Carr an extension that's heavily backloaded so that they can free up some more money going forward? Because, in 2017, Derek signed that 5-year, $125 million deal. And the going rate for a starting quarterback in these times, and especially if he's a top 10, yeah, Derek did have the 10th highest quarterback rating. It's going to be more expensive than that.
There you go. Paul, thanks a lot for joining me. I hope to see you in the fall when this team actually plays at Las Vegas, and you can take me to some bingo parlors for a night out. How's that?
Bingo? Well, as Wesley Snipes said in Passenger 57, always bet black.
The last time I was out in Vegas, I did win at some blackjack, and my wife, though, when I was winning at blackjack, not a lot. I mean, we're talking enough to cover dinners. But while I was doing that, my wife actually was upstairs in a bingo game, and she was winning at bingo. So
that's awesome. That's awesome.
I'm not sure we could have been a younger couple. So there you go. After this break, I'll be back with ESPN's Rich Cimini as we discuss Sam Darnold. Rich has covered Darnold's tenure, so he knows him well. He's not as optimistic about Darnold as a few people I've spoken to in recent weeks. Find out why. Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with ESPN's Rich Cimini. All right, Rich. Well, I guess before we even go further on this, I guess the big question is Sam Darnold really being shopped around the league? I mean, what's the likelihood of this guy being even traded?
Yeah, John, I don't think the Jets are actively shopping the guy. I think they're getting calls on him from teams that are in this so-called quarterback carousel. It's probably like Washington. I mean, they're probably one of the teams that called. So I think teams are just calling around. I think half the league is looking for a quarterback right now, and I'm sure that's why the Jets are getting calls there. But I do think there is a chance that he will be traded if they get the right offer.
Do you think, how sold are they on if they're willing to trade him? They can't be that sold on him. But what do you think their opinion is of him? I know it's a new regime, but what do you think their opinion is of him?
Yeah, I think there's some mixed opinion in the organization right now. I do know that Robert Saleh thinks highly of him, and he has spoken glowingly of him publicly. But I take that with a little bit of grain of salt because we're in the silly season now, and everyone is kind of stretching the truth. But I talk to people who know Saleh, and they say that he genuinely thinks that the guy can improve with a better scheme and better coaching. On the other hand, I don't know if the front office is convinced about Darnold. I think there's some major questions that they have. So I think they're really hashing through it right now, John. I think there's some very mixed opinion. And why wouldn't there be? I mean, the guy has not been a productive quarterback for 3 years.
No, and you just had an article on this, based on looking at next gen stats and how he's one of the lowest rated passers or the lowest over the last couple of years. But yet, like I've talked to people around the league who say that's the guy that I would go get if I was Washington. And you're hearing good things from other people. So why is there such a dichotomy, you think, with him?
I think people are still remembering that he was taken third overall in the 2018 draft, and they figure if a guy's taken that high, there must be some physical talent there. And there is physical talent. His arm is good enough. He throws really well on the run. It's just that his decision-making is very sketchy. I think he has trouble reading defenses. Oftentimes, he'll lock on his first progression, and he only sees the primary defender. I can't even recall how many of his interceptions came when really the secondary defender on the play, made the interception. So I don't think he sees the field exceptionally well.
And that's which would lend itself to, because he does turn the ball over a lot. Behind the scenes, what is he like as far as like his work, his, just how teammates view him and all that?
Blue collar guy, hard worker. His teammates really like him. I've never heard anyone say anything negative about him. He just seems like he wants to be good. Some quarterbacks, I mean, well, you probably covered one this past season.
Yes.
And Haskins, if they don't want to be good or great, then, they're fighting a losing battle. The one negative with Darnold, and some might not perceive it as a negative, some might, he's pretty laid back. He's got that SoCal, Southern California personality. And I know some executives really want their quarterback to be a take charge guy. He's not Baker Mayfield. He's the opposite. He's really more of a quiet guy, laid back, leads by example. If you want your quarterback to be a dynamic personality and charismatic, then he's probably not your guy.
And it's funny because you do hear that from some people like, well, he's California, about other
really
players.
is.
When you talk to scouts, like he's California, and exactly what they're saying. It's that, and it's, whether it's fair or not, that's what they mean.
Yeah.
So you don't view him as much of because again, I know one of the things that Washington would like from Rivera is a strong leader. Is he not that?
Yeah, he's not going to walk into a room and take charge. I mean, I've covered guys like that, even like covering Ryan Fitzpatrick for a couple of years. He was more of a vocal guy. He would be, gravitate towards a leadership role. Sam is more one of the guys, and not the guy. And, you saw him this year. It was his third year, so he kind of took more of a leadership role, but not like look, Eli Manning was laid back and won 2 Super Bowls. Right. So, it can be done for sure. But, Sam is not he's not a vocal guy. He'll lead by his work ethic and by example.
How much has he been victimized by the situation there?
Very much so. I mean, that's the thing that makes this evaluation so hard and why you have to look past the numbers. He was not well coached the last 2 years under Adam Gase. The funny thing is they scored on a lot of their first possessions. So when they script their first 15 plays, whatever was on that script would work. But then when they were off the script, everything went to hell in a handbasket after that. And so he was not well coached. He has not been around what I would call like an elite talent. I mean, they signed Le'Veon Bell to be that guy. Le'Veon Bell is done. I mean, as you saw with the Chiefs, he was not, the one good player they had was Robbie Anderson, and they let him go to Carolina. And so Sam has not had a go-to guy. I just dug up this stat yesterday. Out of his 38 career starts, only in 4 of those games did the Jets rush for 150 yards.
Wow.
So he's never even had a running game that could take some of the burden off. So, yes, that is definitely part of the equation.
And also, like, when you look at this quarterback class, and you talked to Mel Kiper about this, and I did too, like, he thinks that 5 quarterbacks are going to go in the top 15 probably, or very possible. Which quarterback do you think that might tempt the Jets at number 2?
Well, I think it would be Zach Wilson for sure, just on the style of offense they're going to run. They're going to run a Shanahan version of the West Coast, which, you're familiar with,
right.
Having seen it and having covered some of the Shanahan disciples. Mike LaFleur, the younger brother of Matt, is going to be the Jets offensive coordinator. So they're very much going to run that offense. And I think Zach Wilson, from what I've been told, really fits that because he can throw on the run. He can make off-schedule plays. His arm talent, I don't think there's any question about his arm talent. There's some other issues with Zach Wilson, just maybe in terms of durability and level of competition that might be a question. But I think in terms of scheme fit, I think he'd be perfect for the Jets.
Knowing what you know about Darnold, having covered him, what would you give up for him?
I would not give up a low one. I know our colleague Adam Schefter has talked on television saying that he thinks a low first-round pick could be in play. If the Jets get a low one, I would say, thanks, Sam. It was nice knowing you. Goodbye. I would take that, absolutely. I would even take, something in the top half of the second round. I think that would be an excellent value because the one part of the equation we haven't mentioned, he's only got 1 year left on his contract, on his rookie contract. So, they may lose him for nothing in a year. So personally, I wouldn't give anything higher than a 3, but given the market, I think the Jets would definitely get a 2 for him.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you, and I wanted to close on that too, what you think they would take for him, because I agree with you. Now, I do think if somebody trades for him, I would think that especially if they give up a 1, they're going to extend him. You have to do that if you give him up a 1 for him. So you'd have to really have liked him before coming out of the draft and like some of the stuff you've seen. What do you think they would accept for him, though?
Yeah, I think the Jets would take something in the top, probably in the top 40 to 50 picks. I think they would take something there. You mentioned the extent. I mean, May 3rd is the deadline for the 50-year option, so that's going to be about $25 million. And as you know, with the new rules, that's fully guaranteed from the moment you exercise that option. So essentially, Darnold will cost your salary cap $35 million over the next 2 years. So if you're a team that really believes in your college scouting reports on him, maybe you make that investment. 2 years, $35 million, and you get a starting quarterback. But for me, I would not pick up that option. I have not seen enough in 3 years to say I'm going to spend that kind of money on this player. I mean, he really hasn't had a stretch of games where you could say, like 2 or 3 games in a row, where you could say, wow, look at that. Right. There's the guy we drafted. He hasn't had that. And that's why any team that drafts, I think he'd be great in Indianapolis, because I really think Frank Reich is a true quarterback whisperer. In Washington, I don't know do they believe in their offensive staff that much to where they would say, we can fix this guy?
Well, they have a guy, and they have a quarterbacks coach in Ken Zampese who's very experienced, so I think they would rely on that a lot.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I do think you have to rely on that. And the people that I've talked to about him, they all liked him coming out. And so I think they're clinging to that and just assuming it was all about being in New York as much as anything.
Well, I would summarize Darnold this way. He's not a guy who's going to win games for you, but you can win games with him. Okay. I think that would be the best way to summarize him. I think his ceiling in the right system with the right coaching staff is probably a middle of the pack. I could like in the 14 to 18 range of starting quarterbacks. I think that's his ceiling. I don't see him going higher than that. So if he lands in the right place and a team is willing to pay the money and the draft picks for that type of quarterback, then it'd be a good fit.
There you go. Rich, awesome insight. Thanks for coming on.
All right, John. My pleasure. Thanks.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Paul and Rich for joining me, and thank you for listening. It was a long episode, so I hope you enjoyed it. Also, for those of you who stuck with this one, I'm offering another private Zoom session where to the first 5 people who provide me an answer to this question. Who is your favorite Washington receiver from the past? No current receivers are eligible. And just know the last time we did this, I had 5 other people on the Zoom session. We talked for about 30 or 40 minutes, so I answer as many questions as I can. Anyway, I'll have another episode later this week. Talk to you next time.